This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, leaders, today I'm honored to have Erin Herman on this show. She helps leaders when it comes to change management, leadership development, and just becoming more effective at what they do. So we're going to talk about that today. Anyway, with all that being said, Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got into change management, leadership development, and things like that.
Absolutely. So I started my career selling elevators and escalators. So I was quite literally paid to help people move up in the world. And from there, I did a complete 180 in my career, and I went on to work at the United Nations Children's Fund. I worked there for about 7 years, and I headed up their global corporate partnership team for the United States. And from there, I transitioned over to Allstack St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, where I was responsible for developing their corporate partnership strategy. And through a series of events, I realized amongst all of my roles, the thing that I loved most was growing and developing my teams and really mentoring my teams. And in fact, when I was at St. Jude, every Friday, I would send an email to my entire department, and there would be a theme. It could be navigating charisma during conflict or tackling challenges amongst chaos. And I would tell a story within that theme. And then I would go through and I would specifically highlight individuals that had exemplified that skill or that quality or that trait for that respective week. And I never really knew if the email was landing. I did it from the first day I started to, the last Friday before I departed. And one day I was sitting in my office and this girl had come up to my office, knocked on the door, and she said, "Erin, can I come in?" And I said, "Absolutely." We just had small talk, and then she had said, "I just live for Fridays." And I said, "Well, yeah, I do too. I get to fly back to Kansas City and see my family." And she said, "No, I really live for 2:00 on Fridays." And I said, "Well, yeah, we're getting closer to happy hour. I can relate." I was just really trying to hang in there with the conversation. And she had said, "No, I look forward to your emails that come out every week. I live for your emails. And every Friday, I open the email and I hope that my name is in there." And I think that was really the catalyst for me. If I can have that type of impact on one person, imagine what can transpire in a room of 2,000 people as a keynote speaker. And so I pursued my dreams, and now I take global stages speaking on change management, women empowerment, self-assurance, and creating positive failure cultures. And I love it.
Awesome. Can you, that last topic that you just mentioned, positive failure cultures, tell me about that and what that means exactly.
Absolutely. If you look at the corporate landscape, the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, there's this heavy pressure to be perfect. And, there's this adverse reaction to failure. I will say that I think tech companies embody this mentality the best. So they iterate and they pivot quickly. And I think that's why we see such success in the world of Amazon and Apple and Salesforce, because they really pioneer the way and not being afraid to fail and then pivot accordingly. They reward the failure, because when you reward the failure, you also reward the big risks taken, which can drive and ultimately secure big success. I talk about creating positive failure cultures, making sure that we're celebrating failures, that we're embracing those challenges, because employees, when they feel safe enough to fail, they also feel safe enough to succeed. And that's when you really drive not only really strong and effective cultures, but you reward the big risks that we take in order to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's really good. How can, I've tried to develop that. I can think back to when I was relatively new manager, and I was managing a team of software developers, and we had like an on-call system to maintain our website at the time and do things with that. And I used to tell people on my team that, I won't ever get mad at you if, you try something new because something's broken and you're doing whatever you can to fix it, even if it's not your expertise. But I will get extremely upset with you if you see something that needs to be fixed and don't say something, and you don't do anything about it and just kind of ignore the problem. But how can we like do a better job of in a situation kind of like that to encourage that positive failure? Because like I want people to try. I want people to give it their best shot, to experiment, to take risks, to to not be afraid to fail as long as they have a way back. So one of the things I always say is fail fast but recover faster. Always have a good recovery plan and don't be afraid of that.
Yeah, I love that you said that and I think it's a really important part to just highlight what a leader is. And I talk about this in my keynotes, but I think it's really helpful to just overtly emphasize.
Okay.
Everybody can be a leader. Leadership is not about org charts or titles or salaries. It is about showing up in those moments that matter most. It is about speaking up when it feels safer to be silent. It is about truly leaning in and taking time to listen, not just respond. Mm-hmm. That is, those small moments are what define leadership. And when you say, you gave the example of if an employee doesn't speak up about fixing something, that's the difference between choosing to be a leader and choosing to be complacent. And you really have to ask yourself, when you're faced with those situations, well, what's my value system, right? Because titles, they're going to change. Roles, they're going to change. Everything in that space is very fluid, but your value system does not change. So do you value people that take time to listen to you? Do you value when people bring a concern, a challenge, a tough topic to you? Or would you rather prefer silence? If you go off of your value system, it'll never guide you in a misaligned way. And also, that's the foundation to building really positive cultures and also positive self-assurance. And I think when you have those two, you lend itself to becoming a leader in your own right, no matter if you have a title or not, because that's not what leadership's about.
Yeah. So what advice would you have to maybe someone that's relatively new in their career that they don't have that self-confidence that you're talking about to speak up sometimes. And they're fearful, like, well, what if I'm wrong? Do I want to express my opinion if I'm wrong, or this feels like this is a problem or something that needs to be fixed, but maybe it's not. How do they know when to speak up and how to be confident in themselves to do that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's all about developing the practices to be self-assured in the first place. So I'll just tell you a quick story, but I remember the first time I went out to meet my team in New York to oversee my colleagues at the United Nations Children's Fund. And I started on the same day as a young woman named Peyton, and I'm swapping out her name for the actual name. But we had both sat down in the Chief Development Officer's office, and he had said, tell me a little bit about yourselves. And, Peyton started off with the fact that she used to work for the United Nations Foundation. She had traveled the world. She had all of this global experience, and she was, identical to the mold that I would pick to sit in that room and, spend time with him and have that role. And then he had come to me and he said, well, Erin, tell me why you're here. And I had just read the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. And so I was literally leaning in at a 50-degree angle right over this gentleman's desk. I mean, our faces were within a couple inches of one another. And I thought, well, man, I'm just going to hit him with the facts. And I said, well, I'm here because I've been the top seller of elevators and escalators for 3 years running. Boom, mic drop, right? Like I thought I was just so self-assured. What a fact to hit him with. And his face went from, cautiously curious to completely bewildered as to why this woman is sitting in my office. And so that was a real gut check moment for me as to the fact that is our self-assurance guiding us in the way in which we need to trust our inner voice. From that moment, I started to learn self-assured practices that really developed, can I read a room? Is this the right topic to bring up? Do I trust my inner voice? So, John, you're probably wondering, well, what are those practices, Erin, that you're talking about? One of them I call is a mirror meeting. And every morning I get up and I have a conversation with myself. I look myself in the mirror and I say, Erin, you can do this keynote today. Or Erin, you can talk on this podcast and you can share all these things about leadership and you can provide the tools. Or Erin, you can reach out to this client and sit down and do a workshop with this C-suite room of Harvard educated executives. I started doing this self-talk and it's almost like dating myself. And honestly, I didn't even realize that I would enjoy dating myself as much as I do. But what I have taken away from this, there's two things. The first piece is that we don't walk around affirming one another at work, on our teams. And sometimes our voice is going to be the only voice that you hear the whole day, giving yourself positive affirmations. So that was important to me because our inner voice is the most critical voice we can have in any one relationship. The second is that it's important for us to talk to ourselves. It's important for us to analyze situations. What we tell ourselves is ultimately what we become. And so you want to develop those muscles to be self-assured. I didn't have it, and I couldn't always trust my inner gut. And so I always say, do a mirror meeting and start to build those muscles that will ultimately develop courage, that will develop the courageous muscles that you can bring forth a tough topic or a tough conversation. And it's not about, I just will emphasize, self-assurance and courageous decision-making is not about being perfect. You don't have to get it right. It's just about taking the first step. So I would tell people, bring it up. Bring it up. What's the worst that you're going to get? Feedback like, hey, this isn't that important, but I appreciate that you took the liberty to raise this in the first place. That's what you want to teach. That's the behavior, not the end result.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important aspect to talk about because we always feel the silence that we have in our head with negative thoughts. At least a lot of us do. At least I do. Whenever, I present something and my boss doesn't reply with like telling me, is this good? Is this bad? I always assume, oh, that was terrible. That's why he didn't reply. Yeah. He didn't want to hurt my feelings, but it's terrible. And I need to do better next time. But I like what you're saying is if we can be that positive influence for ourselves, then we don't have to rely on someone else to do that. And it is something that we as leaders should do to our team. We should be more, affirmative and, communicating those positive affirmations whenever we have them. But it's a challenging thing to do. Like for me, I don't think about like, if you're doing your job, I don't, you're not the problem. So I'm not going to focus on you right now, which is, detrimental to the people that are doing their job because we want to be able to focus on them too and tell them that you're doing well. That's where one-on-ones become very important for me is to be able to have that scheduled time where, whether you're doing good or bad, I'm going to talk to you during this time. And this time is just for you. And that's my time to give you the positive affirmations, to give you the negative affirmations, to kind of do the whole thing. And, so I think that is a positive thing, but like you said, having that positive self-talk, and I like the idea of a mirror meeting. I've never heard that before. So that's something I definitely need to put in my notes as something to try out. Cause I definitely have those, automatic negative thoughts, as they call it, the ant syndrome, where you automatically go to that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not good enough or you did something wrong, or that imposter syndrome that creeps into place. So, yeah.
Well, and I love what you're saying about, if I didn't hear from my boss, I just assume maybe he's mad at me or he's on,
Right.
But what I take away, one of the points that I love to talk about is the power of assumptions. And
Mhm.
I always tell this story when I had started at an organization that had said, Erin, hey, we need you to completely revamp the corporate partnership strategy and build a really successful pipeline. And we need you to bring in $150 million in the first year, right? Like, no problem. Okay. Totally terrifying. And they just slid in this small caveat of, hey, and the team is a little bit demotivated right now and not really aligned. So, I thought, okay, great. Like, I can do hard things. I have those mirror meetings. I got this. And so I show up on day one and they said, oh, your whole team is in the conference center. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. So I walk over to the conference center. I open the door and the conference center is about 200 rows. And I look from the entrance and I see everybody in the conference center is in the very back three rows. So I'm talking there is a solid 150 feet between myself and the whole team. And there's no microphone, okay? And I can project, but I can't project that loud. So I do almost what I call the walk of shame back to the very back three rows. And I'm walking slowly and my brain is, all kinds of self-talk like, well, this is a little bit odd. Why is everybody so far back? And anyways, I sit down and I think they thought, oh, Erin's here to drop more work on us, or Erin's here to tell us how terrible we are. I could only just imagine, right? And I thought, I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'm going to catch them off guard. So I pull up a chair. I sit in one of the back three rows with them. And I say, hi, my name's Erin Herman. And I said, I paused and I said, before I share anything about myself, I want to talk about every assumption that is currently being made in this room. I want every single one laid out on the table. And the team started saying, hey, this is why I think you're brought in, or this is what's going to happen, or is so-and-so going to get fired? And I took hours to just address every single assumption being made in that room. And then I finally shared a little bit about my background. And when I was leaving and I was walking out of that room, one of the women came up to me and she said, Erin, I just want to tell you that's the first time we've ever done anything like that. Mm-hmm. And it's also the first time I felt really valued. And it blew me away because it's something we all take for granted, right? We make all these assumptions. We jump to conclusions. Time's never on our side. We're parents. We've got a lot of teammates that we're trying to develop. We've got return on investments we're trying to tackle and put forth the boards. But if we just take a little bit of time to talk about the misguided assumptions that are happening, think about the cultures that we can build, and think about how we make people feel at the end of the day. So my thoughts on assumptions.
No, I think that's really good. And I think that's one of the things we need to think about, and when it comes to like misguided thoughts and things like that, that's an important topic also when it comes to change management, because a lot of times when things are changing and there's transformation going on, there's a lot of fear. And people have fear that, we just went on a leadership retreat with our leadership team to do a little strategy session. And we came back and some of the first questions asked are like, oh, we doing layoffs? We're cutting staff? Like, no, we're not talking about that at all. Like, what are you talking about? But that's where people's mind they go to these fears. How is it that you handle change management when it comes to dealing with the fears of transformation?
Yeah, love that question. I tell everyone I teach a methodology, and I learned this methodology from my time at the UN. And I've had the privilege to sit in rooms with, CEOs of Microsoft or UN agencies or diplomats or Sony Music. I mean, you name it. I've sat in the room with these folks and we've done ideation sessions. And within all of these rooms, there was always three qualities that I noticed that just stood out to me from conversations and dialogue. And I took the three qualities and I built them into a present day methodology, and I call it the KEG method. And I'm not talking about a great college party, even though I'm happy to dive into that too. But I'm talking about courage, empathy, and a growth mindset. And when you package those three together, you can truly make change management a transformational experience where everyone is coming together to form the workplaces that I think we all want to work at and for, but very few of us experience. You sprinkle those three in, and it's transformation at its finest. So bring me in, let me talk on all three, and I promise you, your organization will not only entirely shift, but the revenue attached to the results that we're all responsible for, and that's never going away, will actually drastically increase because the culture needed to drive results shifts. And that's the beautiful part about the KEG method.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're 100% right. And, when I look at those three things, the one that I struggle with the most is empathy. And, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the way I was brought up. Maybe it's just the way my ADHD works, but I have trouble sometimes, focusing on, empathy and understanding someone else's point of view. And it's one of those things I have to be very intentional about. What advice would you have to a leader out there like myself who struggles with empathy?
Hmm. Yeah, I think empathy in general gets this stigmatism like, oh, that's a soft skill, or that's
It's hard for me, so it's not soft at all.
right. Or yeah, sometimes it's really hard. I mean, you'd meet my husband and you'd be like, do you have an empathetic bone in your body? Everybody is different, right? But here's what empathy is. Empathy is a power skill. And empathy actually was recently ranked by Forbes magazine as the most important skill to possess in the workplace. So it essentially said that it'll lead to a 90% satisfaction rate within your workplace and a 79% reduction in turnover. Now, if you think about that, 8 out of 10 people that would normally walk out of the door because they didn't get a promotion or they didn't, get the raise they were looking for, they don't. They don't, because they're happy, because they feel empathy, they feel cared for. And, I tell this story. When I was at one of my organizations, there was this woman, Tracy, and she had really shown me what empathy was. I was actually in a board meeting and I got a call from my sister. And I thought it was weird because when I traveled a lot, no one really called my phone. I was working 12, 14-hour days. So my sister's calling. I step out of this board meeting. I pick up and she says, hey, Erin, Dad's been placed on life support. And it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. So I pack up my stuff. I try and fly home. I end up missing my dad by about 10 minutes. He ended up passing. A few days later, my 40th birthday party rolls around. And I thought, this is the last thing I want to do is celebrate today. I just want to take, a low-key Saturday to have my coffee and just do nothing, just be with my thoughts. So I walk out to the mailbox and I, get the mail. But in the mail, I see this card and it's a white envelope. It's got black writing on it and it says Erin Herman. There's no return address. And I thought, well, that's odd. So I take it back to my house. I open it up and Tracy was let me just caveat this. Tracy was a newly acquired employee. I mean, her and I had maybe only worked together for about 3 weeks. But the unique thing about Tracy is Tracy really took the time to listen. And she really took the time to know what I needed in that moment. Mm-hmm. Tracy had actually gone ahead and dedicated a Catholic TV Mass network session specifically for my dad. And she did this because we didn't live in the same state. And she wanted me to know that somebody was thinking about me and my family while we were going through this difficult time. And for me, that moment in time signified not just empathy, but empathy in motion. So not just saying, oh, I care for somebody, but actually caring for and doing something about it, being intentional, like you mentioned, John, being intentional with your actions. Empathy is not this huge monumental, I need to shift the earth around. It's just these small intentions that let people know, hey, I'm hearing you. I see you. I care for you. And that's what keeps people in rooms at the end of the day when everything else is swirling around them. And so I always ask, listeners or audience members, who's your Tracy? Who's your Tracy in life? Who have you worked with that's your Tracy? And think about them and cherish them and take what you've learned from them and implement it in your own life.
Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah, that is fantastic. It reminds me back when I was a new manager and I kind of, sucked at it. A big part of it is because of that lack of empathy. And I had 6 people that reported to me at the time, and 2 of them quit on the same day. And so I lost a third of my team, one day. And, they gave me good reasons of like, oh, we got jobs, at the banks in Charlotte, whatever. And so I had a mentor, a newly assigned mentor for my company because, that's what happens when you have the worst turnover in the company. They give you a mentor. But anyway, so I'm talking to my mentor, who's a fantastic guy. And I tell him about the people left. And he's like, okay, why do you think they left? I said, well, they both got raises, 10% raises to go to the banks. And we can't compete with the banks, So I just let them go, And he goes, nah. He's like, if you loved your job and loved your boss, would you leave for 10% more money? I go,
Right.
well, no.
Right. Huge.
And he goes, so why do you think that they're leaving? Like, there's got to be another reason. And you're their leader. So I'm pointing right at you. You're the reason they're leaving. So we changed our culture around a lot for our team just from that one conversation, to where we started having, more communication. We started doing volunteer work together, building that team bond that wasn't there before. And, I've never seen anything like that builds that better than volunteering together. Like, you do something that matters, that's not related to your job. For us, it was, a group of 6 software engineers. We would go out and, pressure wash, toys at playground equipment at a, orphanage or something like that. And it just, brings people together in a way that they don't want to leave. They're not interested at all in, 10% raise or 15% raise here or there.
Right.
So I love what you're saying there with what Tracy did for you. That's really important and, fantastic.
Well, and, Will Packard talks about this concept that he calls healthy arrogance. And I think when you're a new manager, you feel, or newer, I think about like the first time I thought I was this great manager too, and I fired everybody on my team and, still thought I was going to deliver results. But this concept of healthy arrogance, I think, is really important for new managers, okay? Because when you're a new manager, you're still flooded with imposter syndrome. You're flooded with insecurity. You are flooded with, okay, like, how I just am focused on results. Like, I don't care about if people like it here or not. As long as I perform, we're going to deliver, and that's going to be great, right? All these things that, get revoked over time, and you realize, like, oh God, that is literally the worst thing I could have done. But Will talks about healthy arrogance. And I like to remind people of the fact that when he talks about healthy arrogance, he says, you belong in that room. Even if you're a manager for 1 year or if you're a manager for 50 years, you belong around that table. And it's your responsibility to tell people why you're there. It's your responsibility to share your insights, your point of view. Whatever you bring to the table, you just have to show them that. But don't lean into the insecurity or ultimately the fear of imposter syndrome and then show up ugly or show up as not who you truly are. And it's not from an ego-based perspective, right? Like, let me also caveat that. Like, we're not saying you're better than anybody either. But when you realize, like, you do have purpose and you do have security to be a part of that table, I think you show up nicer. You show up more secured. And you remember your role at the table. Hey, I'm an advocate for others. Hey, I can sit there and I can listen and I can actively validate people's points even if I don't agree with them. Those are all the important elements that I think compartmentalize new leaders, new managers, that I just think I just want to remind the audience of when you're in those tough moments. It's okay to show up and let people know why you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some people, maybe it's an insecurity that they have. They show up and they think, oh, I've got to punch back. I've got to, be a jerk and win the argument. But that's not how it goes, And also going back a little bit to the idea of, our jobs as business leaders is to grow revenue or to, increase the bottom line or do something like that, finish a project. But we have to also think that behind, and this is something I learned at church a long time ago, is behind every number is a life and a person. And, if you are increasing revenue, then you're getting new customers and those are new people. And you have to realize how you affect that and how you treat people at your company is going to spill over to how your employees or how your customer service reps or how your engineers treat people that they, your customers and so on and so forth.
Totally.
So you've got to carry that culture down.
I actually love that you said that, because I did a podcast a couple weeks ago and it was with middle-aged women, right? So the target demographic is, 50 plus. I'm mid-40s. I don't even know how I got, made the cut here, but I'll take it. But on the call, we were talking about wins and celebrations. And I said, look, at my age, people are either married or they're divorced. They're not really out. It's not the wedding season where I'm going to 14 different weddings. And I said, people are pretty much locked into their careers. It's not like we're just coming out of college and we're cheering our friends on as they get these new roles. But I said, I'm a person that likes to experience wins every day. But I had to reframe my thought process to celebrate these micro wins. So instead of focusing on these major life events, I started to focus on the fact that, my son Biggie, he's a little chunky guy, so we call him Biggie. But my son Biggie, who's a first grader, comes home and he got an A on his spelling test. Or my daughter, who's a middle schooler, is like, hey, I did something really nice for this girl today. And I'm like, oh, perfect. Like, I'm not raising a self-centered adolescent. Those were the little wins I had to focus on. But when you feel a lot of joy in your personal life, it translates to your work culture. You bring that joy and that enthusiasm into your workplace. And when you do that, you build these cultures that people want to show up for. They don't want to leave. And so it's, I always ask people, what are the micro wins in your life driving joy? Like, think about it. I don't know what they are, but when you can identify them and you can say, like, well, this is what I bring to my work, this is the joy that I infuse when I show up, that's really powerful and super powerful.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It is extremely powerful when you can bring that forward and especially when you have an outlet to share it with, and when you have a moment like that or an experience and you just keep it inside, it's not as impactful as being able to share it. And I think that's another important step that you have to take as well. Um, so let's pull this together and talk about how can all of this that we're talking about affect change management and affect people and leaders when they're going through a transformation and starting one, and what about this and its empathy and all these things that we've kind of hit on today, how can they all be pulled together to have that effective change?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we have to reframe change first off. So we have to think of change as an opportunity. Everybody puts this, like, we hear change, like, hey, there's going to be changes. We're going to meet together as a leadership team, or there's a company-wide event where we're going to talk about the changes happening. And boom, instantly people go to panic. They go to anxiety. They go to this adverse, up goes the wall. We don't want to listen to it, right? So we have to change our perception of change. We have to totally transform how we look at change, and we have to be open to it. And we are open to changes by how we create the environments in which we work. So do we reward failure? Do we reward the courageous decision making? Do we create environments where we actively listen and validate you? Do we create environments where we've got this growth mindset of, hey, we can persevere no matter what we face together? The hardest seasons, we can still elevate one another. If we've got all three of those elements, when change is happening or when you're working towards a collective change, change isn't seen as scary. There isn't a wall that goes up. People are like, all right, cool. What have we tackled? Or what are we tackling now? We've done hard things in the past. We can do them again. And so it reframes how we respond to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that response to change is the most important part. It's not really the change itself as much as it is the response, right? Or am I off on that one?
No, you got it. You got it. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Erin, this has been a great conversation. I feel like we could go on for hours talking about this stuff. How can people connect with you online if they want to learn more, if they want to book you for a session or have you come in and talk to their company?
Absolutely. So jump on my website, www.theerinherman.com. I've got all of the keynote sessions I offer. I also do consulting work, and I also do workshop facilitation for intimate groups. If there's a certain leadership block challenge that you want to tackle, I do half day and all day sessions. My website also has different cities that I'm speaking on, different events at. So reach out to me. I also am on LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram at Erin Herman, and send me a message. Let me know who's your Tracy. What's your micro win? I always love to hear from people, and I take the time to respond to every message that I get. So just check in. I love to hear from you guys.
Awesome. I'll link that too in the show notes at geekleader.com so people can go there and click through as well. Again, Erin, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, John. I really enjoyed it.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to. Click on their links and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.